when people internalize their emotions, it then becomes a problem. So if you're in, let's say, you know, outside, you're almost in a road traffic accident and a car whizzes past yours and you just pull to the side of the road and you think that person just is absolutely nuts, or maybe they had an emergency that they had to go to, they had to get home fast. You know, if you just sit there and you just relax and you then tell yourself that you're fine, and if you can let it go, it's probably not a problem, and you can just, you know, wash it away. Now, if you're one of these people that finds it really hard to let those kind of circumstances go, if you've had some sort of grievance against you and you can't let it go, what happens is you start to loop that thought pattern in your brain, and you'll internalize it, and it will eat away at you, and it will trigger a series of psychological responses that lead to electrical changes in your heart and your nervous system and in your endocrine system. And if that goes on long enough, it starts to really affect negatively your immune system and your hormones. And of course, the resultant fact is that your cortisol starts to screw up. And cortisol is tic-tac-toe: cortisol, insulin, estrogen. These are the fat-causing hormones. Now, people will get sick or ill when they are under a lot of stress. It just happens that way because cortisol suppresses the immune system. Their hormones get out of whack, their immune system starts to suffer, and generally they feel really crappy. Now, stress, unfortunately, does that. And, you know, the bottom line on this is that you can only heal when you're relaxed. When you actually create a state of relaxation, that's when you can heal. And this is so important. You guys just can't change your diet. You do have to change your diet, and you have to change your lifestyle, and you have to be able to relax. Now, our current levels of stress seem to represent people are, you know, in some sort of way disconnected from themselves emotionally, and they're desensitized, or let's say they're oversensitized, so they've disconnected. Now, and people really have, they don't really live with a sense of community. A lot of people don't have loving relationships, or whatever that bonds us to other people, you know, good family ties, good culture, you know, and everything has basically disappeared. We've become a fragmented society, and people really are just drifting around unconnected to their emotional selves. And this is unfortunate because it just co-participates in even more stress. And many menopausal symptoms are as a result of that chronic stress, and emotional stress, and it could be dietary stress, and it could be pain and inflammatory. So let's talk about dietary stresses. Well, if somebody's in the age of 35 to 45, 50, and they're going through really bad menopausal symptoms, the dietary stresses will be overconsumption of food to compensate for a psychological issue, a lack of exercise because it's a lack of energy. They usually consume excess sugar and grains and refined foods, and they usually have a diet that's lacking in proper nutrients, and usually there's some sort of underlying food sensitivity going on to gluten, dairy, or soy. But estrogen dominance, as the name suggests, it's a dominant state. Estrogen dominance is a situation where progesterone levels are often affected to a greater extent than estrogen levels by adrenal exhaustion. And so in other words, when somebody gets burnt out, the one hormone that really gets affected, progesterone, drops down really low, and estrogen still remains relatively high. So the burnout scenario literally creates this flip, this estrogen dominance. And remember, the progesterone is being burnt off and being converted into cortisol. So, of course, not only does someone have the experiences of estrogen dominant symptoms, but also the progesterone deficiency symptoms come through as well. So there's kind of like 2 or 3 scenarios all taking place at the same time. Now, the symptoms of progesterone deficiency, which is very, very similar to estrogen dominance or estrogen excesses, is that because of an absence of progesterone, usually there will be swollen breasts because the estrogen is allowed to express itself on the breast tissue. There will usually be headaches, anxiety, irregular menstrual cycles. There's usually an element of infertility, cramping, and usually spotting before the period. And because progesterone stabilizes the endometrial wall, if there isn't enough progesterone, the wall starts breaking down prematurely, and it manifests in a spotting. Acne, because progesterone is so wonderful at improving skin. Progesterone is a good fat burner, so when people lack it, they usually are gaining weight. They usually have a low libido, they usually have mood swings, they're not very relaxed people. There's usually an element of depression that's coming through. Definitely premenstrual symptoms are coming through. Progesterone affects the way our brains think, so when we have a lack of it, there's a lot of fuzzy thinking. And also progesterone has anti-inflammatory properties to it, so there's an element of joint pain if it's absent. So the adrenal glands are so important because they massively influence our sex hormone function, and this is why law number 3 is so important. The adrenal glands are responsible for approximately 35% of the reproductive hormone production in premenopausal women. And In postmenopausal women, it jumps. It goes from 35% to 50%. And of course, the adrenal hormones are so important as we age, and as we lose our adrenal hormones and we lose our sex hormones, we get into a lot of trouble. And of course, it comes down to cholesterol, converts into pregnenolone, pregnenolone converts into DHEA and progesterone. And this pathway is so important to understand it as we age. And of course, as we age, we basically experience more and more stress, emotional stress, dietary stress, pain and inflammatory stress, and it manifests in cortisol. Now, cortisol can affect every major body system, and pretty much cortisol will basically, if it is balanced, will help burn fat, it counters inflammation, and it helps to maintain the immune response. It stabilizes the person's personality and mood, and it basically has a massive influence on how our energy levels are. So when we have high cortisol, we're usually really sort of edgy, and when we have low cortisol, we have fatigue. So when it's in excess, we store fat, we don't sleep well, we become emotionally unstable, we don't build muscles well, we lose our bone mass because it depletes calcium, it weakens our immune system, and we are more susceptible to allergies. So when you're first going under stress, your cortisol levels will go up. But if your stress remains chronic, long term, and it goes day in, day out, week after week, month after month, if that stress is chronic and long term, it will eventually burn out the adrenal glands and they will become exhausted. And of course, then comes in the fat and the fatigue. And of course, your cortisol levels will then begin to drop and drop and drop. And remember, all that cortisol is being stolen away from the primary hormone called progesterone. So when we have adrenal dysfunction, the excess fatigue and back pain that we're experiencing as we age, the hair loss, the irritability, the poor immune response, the sleeplessness that comes through with aging, the massive sugar cravings in the 40s and 50s, the headaches and depression and indigestion, lightheadedness, these are all signs of adrenal burnout. And of course, anxiety is also associated with it, food allergies, dry skin, poor memory. And of course, the best thing that you can do in that kind of scenario is basically treat it with diet. It is one of the most important things. So going on a really good stress-free diet, anti-allergy kind of diet, like the kind of 5 laws diet. So a diet that is high in good quality blood type proteins, that has non-starchy vegetables and healthy fats, will help to control the insulin and the glucagon levels. Reducing the insulin and boosting the glucagon will help create a fat burn. And of course, it also not only creates a fat burn, but it also creates the adrenal gland recovery scenario. Now, so if you eat allergies and you've got a gluten intolerance, this can create a lot of tissue damage in the intestines that's comparable to literally blowtorching your intestines with those particular molecules. So reducing your stress response from your diet is key. So don't eat allergies. Follow a good diet system. Following also a food rotation diet and elimination system is also kind of quite good. We do that from Genova Diagnostic Labs. And you know, this really resolves many symptoms. So glycemically balancing the proteins and the carbs is absolutely essential. Metabolic typing, we discussed that actually in the 3rd law video, and it was kind of really important to assess what your blood pressure is doing and your breath hold to see exactly what kind of metabolic type you are. Are you predominantly a protein? Are you mixed? Or are you a carbohydrate type? You know, you've got to figure this out. And your blood pressure tells you. So you got the answers. Well, your body has the answers. You just got to test it. Anyway, and of course, eliminating gluten, because gluten right now these days is massively high on the GI index. Soy, you know, is also bad for diets because it promotes too many estrogens. So does dairy. So do hydrogenated oils. And also, alcohol seems to aggravate estrogen function as well. It basically, excess alcohol will increase estrogen dominance. Coffee also does it as well, and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. Now, foods to include, you have to try and go organic as best as possible. Have good quality proteins from organic sources. It's very important. Follow the blood type rules, as you well know them now, and you know that they must be working for you now because this is clinically tested, so you must be feeling better. Anyway, so vegetables are very important. Fruits, gluten-free grains such as amaranth and buckwheat and rice are much better alternatives to the other grains. Anyway, so on that note, thanks for listening, and we will be, you know, talking about the male hormones on the next video show. So, you know, remember that slogan? Reach out and grab the health you really need to feel in order to believe. So here's to your health, and bye for now.